Hi, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Ancient Wines member tasting, Ancient Wines Club member tasting. This month's club was Realms of Order Wines of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. I hope most of you, if not all of you, have gotten the wines. We've had a little bit of trouble this time with heat damage and a couple broken bottles. So apologies for if you're one of those people that didn't get your wines for some reason. We'll make sure you get them as soon as possible. We're really excited about this club. This is one we've been talking about for quite some time. I'd say actually all the way back to the beginning of the Ancient Wines Club. And the main reason for that is it's right in the wheelhouse of our own Dr. Dana DiPietro, who did his PhD on in Near Eastern Studies at Berkeley. So this is something he's been wanting to do for a while. We finally kind of got around to it, got some great wines, and we're super excited about it. So I'm actually going to turn it right over to Dana, who can tell you a little bit more about the kind of the impetus for the club and how it came together. And then he's going to take us through the first wine in the evening as well. So thanks, Dana.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, as Jeff said, this was a really fun one for us to do, and of course the wines that we were able to find for this were really reflective not just of the history, but also the geography of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. When we say the Neo-Assyrian Empire, it's like it's not one of those things that jumps out, right? It's not like ancient Egypt. It's not even like the Hittites. It's like, who again? Like, who are these people? But it is this. It's a massive empire that basically starts up, gets going in the 7th century BCE and spans all the way from the Eastern Mediterranean. So we're talking like Cyprus and into Egypt, as far east as Iran, and expanding even into like the Indus a little bit. So a really important period of time, and a really fun one to explore with wine, because wine, of course, was super important to this. So we get into that in the club, but this is our chance to really not just talk about that, but to talk about these wines in particular. And we're going to start on the very far western edge of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. We're going to go to Cyprus. And this first wine that we're going to talk about is the 2021 Tsiakkas Mouklos. It's Mavro Mouklos, 100%. And this is a Cypriot wine from the center of Cyprus, from the Troodos Massif, or the Troodos Mountains. And it's actually one of my favorite places on earth. It's such a bizarre place of interesting contradictions, and it's got a wine history that actually goes back 5,500 years. You can actually find early Bronze Age vessels that are wine bowls, and we know they're wine bowls because Cypriot art throughout the Bronze and Iron Age has this really interesting self-referential quality, right? So you'll find figurines that are wearing little versions of themselves around their necks. You find vessels where is pouring out, the spout of the vessel is somebody holding another vessel, and then the wine or fluid comes out of that tiny vessel. So it's really clever, self-referential stuff. And we find images of winemaking and wine pressing as early as the Middle Bronze Age, or the early Bronze Age and into the Middle Bronze Age. That kind of continues. I mean, Cyprus is famous for a lot of historic wines. Some of you might have tried Commendaria, which comes from Cyprus. That's another one that's been made for, well, I mean, they'll claim that it goes all the way back to Homer. It's really famous because Richard the Lionhearted, when he takes over Cyprus, because Cyprus is this in-between place. It's neither fish nor fowl. It's, sometimes taken over by the Crusaders, and then they sell it to the Venetians, and then the Venetians lose it to the Ottomans, and it goes back and forth. But what's amazing is there's always amazing stuff coming out of Cyprus. Everyone wants to control it. It's a place of copper, opium production, through the late Bronze Age happens there. And of course, fantastic wines. And what you find in Cyprus are a lot of really interesting native autochthonous varietals, varietals like Yianudi, Promara, Vamvakata, which I've never tried. Ryan, have you ever tried Vamvakata? I had never even heard about it.
I have not had a Vamvakata. I've had some of the other Mouklos grapes, because Mavro means I think black or dark, if I remember correctly. But I've not had Vamvakata yet. But stay tuned.
Yeah, exactly. We'll find some for you. It sounds like a spell out of Harry Potter, and I just want to drink it. So we'll find that as well. But yeah, this is one of those awesome varietals that the Mavro Mouklos, which is it's been grown in Cyprus. Cyprus, has a pretty tumultuous history, as we were saying, even in the modern age. A lot of these varietals were being made in the 60s, 78 hits. Turkey invades, takes over 33% of the northern island. Everything kind of gets crazy. And a lot of these old vineyards are left to just kind of fall apart. Well, in this case, the Tsiakkas family was making wine throughout the 60s. In 1988, they came back, reclaimed some of these vineyards. And this is where we get this really fantastic light-bodied red. Again, this is 100% Mavro Mouklos. It's essentially ungrafted vines grown in sandy volcanic soils, which again, right, we're talking Mediterranean islands. High elevation, it's at 1,000 meters. The Troodos Massif it's huge. They're these mountains that kind of just spring up. And if you land in Nicosia in the airport, you'll just see them coming in. It's a place of contradictions and changes and high elevations and cold. It snows up there. So high elevation vineyard, the vines are, as we mentioned, 80 years old. And this is carbonic maceration. This is all organic carbonic maceration. The grapes are macerated for 35 days. And that again, right, this is sort of like what we see in Beaujolais, right? Where the grapes are left unpressed and they begin to ferment in their own skins, and the weight of them presses down in this sealed steel container. So 40% whole cluster in stainless steel. And what you come up with is, if you're smelling this and you're thinking, Beaujolais, it is a bright grape. I mean, there's a lot of like cherry, sweet strawberry on this. It makes me think of like these amazing young Gamay producers that we're seeing in France that we were really fond of at different times. But it's not overpowering either. I think it's a really well balanced and beautiful wine. This red fruit that goes into the palate, but still dry and not overly fruited. I'm really gonna like stereotype myself, but saying this, and also it's probably because it's the end of July and it's hot as hell here in California. I know you guys are all over, coming from all over, but it's kind of hot everywhere in the world right now. And this is one that I would put a little chill on too. You could definitely chill this, and maybe I just want cool things right now, but.
The winemaker actually suggests that, Dana. Actually, when we were first looking into this wine, because there's actually like exactly like you said, there's this carbonic maceration process that goes on, which is essentially like a anaerobic process that used to kind of extract the juice, ferment the juice, but without extracting a lot of tannin and color. We've talked about this before with past wines that we've featured, but this wine actually has like a very very similar sort of profile, like you mentioned, to a lot of those Gamays. But the winemaker, he did when we reached out, he said that there's actually like there's no shame in chilling this wine. So back in the day, folks would put a little ice cube or whatever in the wine. Like it's okay. We're not here to cast judgments. We're not here to tell you how you can or cannot drink the wine. And just one thing, just because I was looking at the bottle earlier, so it does say Mouklos. Mouklos Ambellissimo on the bottle. It's the same thing as Mouklos Mavro. It's the same, at least when I was last checked, I believe it does say that. Same grape, and just one of those things where on the website it says Mouklos Mavro, and you're which grape is it? So it is the same grape there.
Yeah, it's just so fresh and vibrant, and just a little chill on it with some charcuterie, classic pairing with wines that go through this carbonic maceration process.
You can do fish with this too. I could imagine like fresh fish dishes.
There's like a nice spice to it. A lot of this kind of like rose hips and kind of like sort of around the edges. That's it's really pretty. I like you kind of mentioned Gamay. I also get kind of like some Pinot Noir sort of elements sometimes, but maybe a little bit different body and structure. Just a really unique wine that's, I think, for folks who either are white drinkers who don't love red wines, this is a great crossover wine, because it almost, if you want to split hairs here, it could probably fall into some rosé categories because of the way that the maceration is done. And then also it's a great kind of crossover wine for folks who are like big, heavy red drinkers, but you want to try and convert them to things that might work on a hot day better than like a Cab or a Malbec or Petit Syrah or Zin or something like that. Nothing wrong with those wines, but in the heat of summer sometimes in July, you know, at a barbecue, this is actually a really great fit for some of those kind of more barbecue foods.
Totally.
And
I think it's very much like cypress itself in that in-between space, filling both those roles and the balance of the tannins and the acids. Yeah. Sorry, Jeff. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh no, sorry, Dan. Sorry, we're on Zoom. It's I was gonna say, I mean, this is something we've said before, but I think we all kind of feel like we're evangelists a little bit for these lighter body reds. Just there's so many wonderful reds from around the world that just, like you say, Ryan, kind of have that little, almost for a white wine drinker, you know, it'll feel really familiar, and then it has kind of an elegance, oftentimes like lower alcohol, and a lot of great wines we featured and look forward to featuring, kind of fit that bill. So this is cool. And I think this is the third time we've used this wine or a version of it with an event and then a special offer, and finally had a chance to throw it into the club. So yeah, we love this. We love this one.
Into it in the club. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is actually, if you had this wine before, this is actually a new vintage of the wine. So
you would have had to come to one of two very obscure events at different times.
Yeah.
But you're out there. We know you're out there. We see you.
Yeah.
And there'll be more. We're coming.
Yeah, and honestly, this is a lot lighter, a little bit lighter than a lot of Beaujolais I've had in the past year or two, which, you know, I feel like there's a trend in Beaujolais going towards a little bit more extraction, a little bit more like Burgundian style, or like mixing a blend of carbonic and like barrel ferment. But I think this is really light and pretty.
Yeah, to you, just on that point, this you know, this idea that a darker wine is a more serious wine or a more, you know, worthy wine or a more, you know, important wine is something that unfortunately has kind of driven, like you're saying, these Beaujolais producers just to try to lose the reputation of something just being kind of light and sort of silly and fun, and they're trying to, like you said, they're extracting their wines more. You're seeing this a lot also, I mean, just based on the fact that it's getting hotter in Burgundy. You know, climate change is definitely affecting things there. Talk to any winemaker there, they're like, yeah, I'm picking 2, 3, 4 weeks earlier at sometimes than my father ever did. And you know, you look back 150 years. And so, but the wines are getting darker, they're getting fuller, they're getting you know, more intense, partly because of what they're given, but also partly because of the fact that there is this demand for darker wines, which means it's a better wine, which obviously, as we know, is not true. You can have very light color wines that can be beautiful, complex, worth aging, worth saving. But you'd be hard pressed to not drink all of this wine in the next 2-3 months if you were me. I couldn't be trusted with any less than 6 bottles of this wine, otherwise it would be gone before September.
You know, I wanted to make a comment. The one distinct difference between this wine and, let's say, Beaujolais is the lack of significant acidity. The wine has a slightly sweet profile in the mid palate in particular, whereas most Beaujolais, you know, has a lot of acidity. And then if you also compare it with like light Italian wines, like let's say Sicilian Frappato, they tend to also be, in addition to acidity, they tend to have fairly firm tannins. And this wine is not tannic at all. I mean, it's a fairly pleasant, easy drinking wine, but it's distinct from all of them. I mean,
yeah, definitely.
You know, if I had this in a blind tasting, I would have no idea what it was.
Oh, if you brought this to a blind tasting, your friends might you might get some dirty looks at the end when you pull it out of the brown bag, because this would be a total stumper.
You get new friends if they're pulling this on you in a blind tasting. That's
But no, you're totally right. You know, like comparing this to actually Frappato is a great comparison if folks are familiar with that, another beautiful wine from Sicily. And yeah, the structure here is definitely different. The carbonic maceration and the essentially what Orestes, the winemaker, calls scaled fermentation. He's employing this to basically reduce as much tannic extraction as possible. He doesn't want any tannins. I mean, I would say, yeah, like compared to a really kind of racy mineral Beaujolais or something like that, definitely not going to be quite as vibrant. Obviously, also we're lower here on the you know, lower latitudes, and we have more sunshine, so it's going to be, you know, a riper wine. Obviously, this is going to happen, and there's just like a nice little kick of sweetness there, like you mentioned. But yeah, definitely a different wine. And you know, it's not to say making comparisons to any wines, which we do often, you know, in our writing and just in general, is not to say that it's you know, that they're always, you know, twins. I would say it's to kind of put your brain sometimes in a ballpark sort of area where you can kind of make comparisons, especially if someone's not familiar with different styles at all. But absolutely. And just as a side note, we love questions. Awesome. Feel free to chime in like that anytime. This is a totally open discourse dialogue, or you can put your questions in the chat if you don't feel like unmuting and saying hello, and we'll answer any and all questions that you have as well in the chat. So
yeah, I had one more question, and that's
Sure.
what's with the fingerprints on the label?
They're really
Oh, wow.
dirty production methods. Yeah, it's a quality control issue.
No.
We're trying to get them off. It's we keep calling the producer, and it's a problem. No, just kidding. Sorry, Ryan. Go ahead. Yeah.
No. I think it's just it's the label. I mean, I think it's putting a signature stamp on there. I actually don't know if those are the winemakers, if that's Orestes Tsiakkas, but I like that. The notion behind it. On his other wines, he doesn't have fingerprints on all the wines, so it may be that this is just a particularly important wine for him as well. But I mean, he did take the time to write a couple paragraphs about the winemaking to us in an email, or to the importer. But yeah, so my guess is it would be the winemaker's fingerprints, but I can double check.
Interesting parallel to that. A lot of times when we're on excavation and we're finding these wine bowls and vessels, we can actually see fingerprints, right, of the ancient manufacturer, like when they're making them. And it's quite something when you pick up like a wine bowl from like the early Bronze Age, and you're holding something that's 5,500 years old, and you see the fingerprints actually on that bowl. It's the person that made the bowl, but at the same time, it's just an interesting parallel because we're talking about that earlier. So Darby, thanks for the good questions. Yeah.
Yeah, it has all the setup for a nice murder mystery or something like that with the, Yeah.
Ryan, what is the scaled fermentation that you were talking about?
Yeah, let me. I pulled up the email here that Orestes sent over to us. So I'll read you. This is directly from the winemaker here, because the distributor importer was explaining it to us, and I was like, "Come again? That doesn't sound. That sounds very strange." And he said, "Actually, let me check. Let me email Orestes." So what he said here about scaled fermentation is that it is also known as sequential fermentation. That this means that yeasts are added in the beginning of the fermentation, usually non-Saccharomyces yeast. So that's actually winemaking yeast. And then after 2 to 3 days, we add the second yeast, usually Saccharomyces. So you have the beginning of the fermentation going by either native yeast, it could be cultivated native yeast, and then they add in Saccharomyces or something like that. And then he says the reasons we add the skins back, so they press off the juice, separate the juice from the skins, and then they add the skins back in, is because this variety, Mavro amalissimo or Mouklos Mavro, once pressed is very, very light in color. Adding on top of the fact that it went through a semi-carbonic maceration, there is no color extraction going on there. Hence, we add the skins back into the tank after fermentation is going to extract a bit more color. The reason we use semi-carbonic for this is because we want to enhance varietal aromas, wild cherry, wild roses, sweet spices, and reduce tannic extraction. We then press after 10 days because the skins cannot withstand more than 10 days or they'll start bursting. That means you'll lose the aromas. And therefore, we press and return the pressed skins in the tank, just a very small amount. We then ferment at 17 degrees Celsius so as not to extract a lot of tannins, just a little bit. And he says, make note that the Mouklos are always served chilled, almost like white wines, with 4 exclamation points after that. This makes it unique as it needs low temperature, and very few reds have a style like this. So he said you can enjoy it during the summer. So hopefully that helps. Yeah, it's a style that I've actually, this kind of mixed fermentation where you have one yeast kicking it off and then you have a second yeast that you inoculate with to essentially take over the fermentation and kind of kickstart it again is it's not common, at least in my experience. It's something that actually probably happens in some wineries unintentionally, where the fermentation begins and maybe they're being a little slow or lazy or something happens, and fermentation kicks off just naturally, and then they inoculate it a couple days in. They go, oh no, that tank is fermenting, and they inoculate. But as far as a intentional usage of it, this is like one of the first wines that I've encountered that really has a intentional use of it. So kind of pretty interesting.
Yeah, thanks, Brian.
Absolutely. Any more questions about this wine? Perfect.
All right. All right, so our second wine of the evening of the club is 2016 Kayra Bogazkere from southeastern Anatolia, which is actually Anatolia is another name for Turkey, in particular in the ancient world, but also in the modern world. So Bogazkere is a grape we've worked with actually quite a lot in our both in our club and in our events over the years, particularly our kind of history of early origins of wine, history of early winemaking and whatnot. It's an indigenous variety to southeastern Anatolia or Turkey, where this wine is from. Winemaking goes back in that area at least as far back as 7,000 years. So as we've discussed in our events, this is, you know, very close to, if not part of the area in which Vitis vinifera comes from. So the Vitis sylvestris, the original wine grape that was used to make wine, was then domesticated essentially, and we get Vitis vinifera. So we're talking about extremely old, ancient grapes here. Bogazkere means, we always love this, it means throat scratcher or throat burner in Turkish, which will tell you a lot about the wine before you even kind of put it into your mouth and swirl it around. This is actually an interesting story, this winery Kayra. So it used to belong to the Turkish government, was a monopoly focused on, they did just kind of mass produced spirits. I think like literally tens of millions of gallons of spirits. And then there's a Napa based wine consultant, Daniel O'Donnell, came in, I think it was 2004, was brought in to kind of modernize the winery and actually start making decent wine. We see this a lot in, you know, a lot of spots, but kind of taking a winery that's producing on a massive scale, producing really bad wine and starting to actually, he said in an interview, basically they had to take kind of 50 years and compress it into 10 years to try to modernize the winemaking style and start making good stuff out of it. And so this is a really we love this winery. I think we worked with I think it was the Okuzgazu Bogazkere blend at one point previously. But let's have a little bit of a kind of a nose. So I love this, love the color and just this, it reminds me of a lot of different things we've used in the past. So kind of a dark, I would say kind of a dark ruby, light purplish color. A lot of kind of wild forest fruits, maybe like wild strawberry, sour cherry, kind of plum. It's got like a nice spiciness to it. I believe it spends 12 months in oak barrels. It's giving a little bit of that, picking up a little bit of that oak character, kind of a tobacco, like dark chocolate, kind of in the secondary profile. And so, yeah, the exciting thing is when you actually like taste this kind of wine, yeah, I mean, it's not as tannic as some of the versions we've had of this. I think with the 2016, already, what is it, 6 years now of age is gonna soften that out quite a bit. This is definitely the kind of wine you could age this for another, 7-10 years, probably be in really good shape. Just has that, just that with those tannins really has the ability to take on some age. Yeah, so it's delicious, well balanced. What do you guys think? I know Ryan, you don't have it in front of you. Dana?
Yeah, the thing when Ryan and I had this wine was we thought it could use a little bit of decanting or a little bit of air. It needs a little bit of time to open up because it's still kind of a little wound up. And I get a lot of stewed fruits out of it too. You can tell like it's like a little bit warmer. Very obviously very different than the Mouklos that we had earlier.
Yeah, those grippy tannins really just stay.
Yeah, it's really long finish. It is. I actually did open mine a couple hours beforehand, so I think that definitely recommend that. Like you say, T. Really hot area, obviously southeastern Turkey. But what is the alcohol in this? Is it 12%?
I think it's right around 12. If I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is kind of amazing that you can keep keep that level down like that with this climate. Says a lot about the winemaking process, really.
We actually expected the tannins to be this high, so I opened it at 10:30 this morning, decanted it, decanted it again, and recanted it. And it's so much better than it was
Excellent.
at 10 a.m.
Yeah, when we went,
Nice,
T and I
yeah.
got a sample when we first opened it, I was like, oh, this is going to be a monster. And
Yeah.
some folks have, I mean, this is actually, there's some interesting research about this. Like some folks have more essentially like, I don't know, sensation receptors for tannin. So some people are like much more sensitive to tannin than others. I remember there was some work at the university in Burgundy that was going on about this, because some people, it's kind of, there's objectivity to tannin, but then some people are like, hey, that's really tannic, and someone else could say, it's not that tannic. But this definitely was a wine that, when I tasted that, I was like, okay, there's going to be some folks who just pop the cork and go. Like if my mom was on the call, she'd be one of those people who I'd be calling out here, because she pops the cork, puts it in the glass, and it's kind of like, expecting it to sort of just have it be presentable. And that's just kind of not the case with a lot of wines. A lot of wines will show better after having some time open. You can there's always kind of a joke in when you're a wine buyer, tasting certain wines at the end of the day, in the sense of when you're having a sales rep come in and show you wines. A lot of times the wines are great because they've been sloshing around in a bag all day long. The wine reps drive like crazy people, so they're sloshing around the back of the trunk. They're getting beat up. The wines are all like, they've had a lot of oxygen like splashed in there. And it's actually something that, end of day wines is always kind of like a little inside joke where, especially for like bigger reds, like a Barolo or something like, old world wines, they would be really, really beautiful after getting kind of slapped around a little bit. And so I think it's definitely the right call for that wine to, decant it, double decant it, triple decant it, get as much air in this as possible. Or also you can always, again, give it a lot of air, but having some sort of protein, having some sort of food, some sort of fats to kind of bind to that on the palate will also help soften it up. So this is one of the reasons why cheese is so magical, is because it's just kind of a delicious version of something that pairs perfectly with tannins. So it binds really well to it.
T and I were rushing back from an archaeological survey up in Sonoma, and we didn't have time to decant this. And I haven't tried it before, so this is one of the ones that I didn't have a chance to taste. And so we opened this up 10 minutes ago. And while Jeff was just, giving us the rundown, I actually wrote to T on my notes. I'm like, what is going on? Is this? And now, yeah, I mean that context. And so, yeah.
Definitely.
Take that archaeological trowel and kind of work those lips off the teeth now, Dana. So
we're gonna revisit this in 2 hours after decanting it. So that's good.
Throw it in a blender.
There you go.
Totally put it in the blender.
This wine reminds me of Madaron. It's old Tannat grape, really big and tannic and all that. You have to keep it like 30, 40 years before it kind of it becomes softens and becomes more drinkable. But I think it's old-fashioned winemaking. That this is the way wine was made centuries ago, and it's not popular with customers nowadays, the wine drinking clientele. And I'm sure if they catch on, they probably will figure out some way to soften their wine. But it's true old-fashioned winemaking.
Absolutely. Yeah, that style of winemaking is like you said, it's hard to sell somebody on a bottle when you say, hey, okay, here's your weeknight bottle. Now you got to go sit, let it sit in the cellar for 15 years. And then you can have it for dinner. That's just it's if you have the time and you have the space, then absolutely, but not a lot of folks don't. So it becomes difficult to sell.
Or else you drink it watered down like they used to.
Exactly.
Yeah. Spot on. Absolutely.
Yeah, the Madaran Tannat connection definitely there, and you can see the kind of the connection there. We're also like Tannat is actually a grape that when you handle it on a lighter style like this wine, it can be a very pretty wine. It doesn't always have to be burly and aggressive. They can be very, very beautiful wines, and I think this wine, for being 12.5% alcohol, it's still pretty despite all of its kind of grippy structure and kind of hefty backbone. that was kind of what compelled T and I when we were tasting it. We're like, wow, this, yeah, like it's definitely a monster, but you know, like it, right out of the gate. But then it was like all these nice kind of, you know, beautiful like sort of flowers, but then it's kind of like nice kind of darker sort of fruits and all this sort of stuff started coming in, a little earth and spice, and yeah, it was something that kind of showed you could have power and grace kind of at the same time. But yeah, 2016, I think this wine is still a baby. You know, the old school winemaking for sure. They're picking a little bit earlier. I mean, again, like Dana was saying, it's hot in southeastern Anatolia. You could get this wine easily into the upper 14s, lower 15s alcohol without, you know, without a second look at it. So I actually kind of commend them for continuing this old school type of winemaking.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, and it's interesting to see it. As I mentioned earlier, this grape Bogazkere is often paired with Kuskazu, which has that is a much lower tannin wine, has more of a kind of a floral characteristic to it. It's often, you know, it's the kind of balancing grape for this to temper it. And I think, as we've been saying, that they did a great job with this wine. It feels elegant, even though it's 100% Bogazkere. So it's kind of cool. It's cool to find an example of just single variety Bogazkere. So yeah, in terms of pairing, I mean, we've mentioned a couple things, but obviously like Parmesan cheese, cheddar, those kinds of cheeses would be great with this. Definitely any kind of kebab, you know,
Rack of lamb.
meats, lamb, but also I think vegetables would work really well with this too. Has a little bit of that, you know, the kind of, I wouldn't say greenness in like a Cabernet Franc type way, but it has a kind of foresty quality to it that I think would pair really well with grilled vegetables as well. Kind of a earth, I guess, earthiness, kind of a green character in that way. Yeah, really good. Love
Yeah,
it.
I'm getting a little mint on here actually.
yeah, there's definitely a little mint and herbaceousness I get too out of it.
You said forest floor, Jeff. The word I thought it was sylvan.
Oh yeah, there you go.
I got mint.
If you really want to, if you wanted to be one of those people who writes their tasting notes that make people roll their eyes, you know, you got to learn all these kind of you know, wine descriptors that, because people read the same, you know, wine descriptors over and over and over again. If you're like, you know, reading magazines or, you know, the back of wine bottles and things like that. And so if you ever want to, you know, really level up your wine game and get the true eye rolls from people, you got to learn all these sort of I won't call them pretentious, but you know, just maybe next level wine words.
Is that leveling up or leveling down? I guess that's the question.
I'll let you decide.
When I was in my first year working at Vintage Berkeley and trying to think of descriptors, Ryan was very patient with me, leading us through a bunch of blind tastings. And I think I said Spanish leather at one point. And to your credit, you didn't like call me a jerk. So thank you.
No. I mean, I just liked. I was just maybe just impressed that you could tell the difference between Spanish and Italian leather just by
I
smelling
had
it.
an idea of what that was. But
Sicilian. I was
like
slightly
in
surprised.
retrospect, no. In retrospect, I didn't know what the hell I was talking about. So you were very kind.
I mean, speaking of decanting, and when I was first starting out in the wine industry, I remember going to this mostly Italian wine tasting where, you know, they had Barolos, but they were all young Barolos, and I didn't know any better, and I was like, oh my God, this is my chance to taste Barolo. Here's like 8 Barolos in a row. This is incredible. You know, I can't afford it, so let me taste it. But, you know, they're basically 3-4 years old. You're tasting in the morning.
Oh yeah.
The cork's just been popped, no decant, you know, whatsoever. And the tannins that just grip your mouth. Like after 3, I was done. I was like, and people are like, oh, I talked to more veteran people, and they're like, that was a rookie move. First of all, only seasoned people can like really taste young Barolo and see how they're going to evolve. And secondly, what you should have done is you have like maybe 1 or 2, and then you have some white wine and maybe some cheese, and then you come back later. So,
I did the same thing. I picked up my first bottle of like Provatore from the shop, and I was like, oh my God, this is going to be so. And yeah, same thing.
Yeah.
And it was 3 years old.
Yeah, exactly. It's 3 years old. Yeah.
At that stage, you're tasting, you know, in a lot of cases, you're kind of tasting, you know, purely the grape, the Nebbiolo grape, and the barrel too. You know, it's so for some, depending on which Barolo producer you're tasting. You know, some old school Barolo producers, they use the big old barrels, but a lot of the more kind of quote unquote new school producers, they're using new oak and they're using small barrels, so like really kind of like tight grain, and those wines can be super woody and super like just aggressive, unpleasant to drink. So some assembly required with some of these wines that you have to lay down for some time. I mean, if you like it, great. We'll never tell you to not drink young Barolo, young Bogazkere, but yeah, it's it can take a little bit of doing to get it to where it tastes good for everybody.
We're looking forward to 2 hours from now.
Yeah. Cool. Are we ready to move on to the next one?
So
I love this label. I'm just going to throw that out there right off the bat. It's awesome.
T, you want me to jump in on this one, or you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. If you want to Ryan, if you want to talk a little bit about the producer and like Lebanese wines, and we had a really great meeting with the wine importer for this.
Yeah. So this is the 2020 Mersel Phoenix Rising. He calls it, the winemaker calls it field blend, even though it's two varieties, 80% Merlot and 20% Sangiovese. The Merlot grape is a native variety to Lebanon. So you see this term native a lot, where sometimes it's native, but then when you dig deeper, some people are saying, oh, it's the same as this other variety that's in this other country. In this case, I was reading a few sources saying that it was similar to Semillon. So it's a white grape. So the red color here from this, you could call it a red, you call it a rosé, by the way, this wine. I would say it, just call it a red wine. I don't know. It kind of defies a little bit of convention there because it's a blend of white and red grapes. So it's just a blend. But the Merlot grape could be this Semillon grape. It could not. Sometimes it's kind of hard until they start doing actual DNA kind of phenotype or genotyping, excuse me, and profiling of it. So, but you have this grape that the winemaker Eddie, I think his last name is Chami. He's Australian, actually, and he doesn't speak French. So when he went to Lebanon to pursue this dream of making Lebanese wine, he obviously decided that he wanted to get away from Lebanon's modern winemaking history a bit, which if you're familiar with, if not, we'll tell you a little bit about it. Lebanon, essentially their modern winemaking history started in the early 20th century from French immigrants. And so you have a tradition that's kind of Chateau Kisara began in the 1920s, if I remember correctly. And you have a number of other producers, Chateau Moussard, very famous producers in Lebanon. But a lot of these are basically French expat projects with like French kind of expat mindsets behind the winemaking, behind the, what is a good wine? What grapes should you grow? So in Lebanon, a lot of the grapes are French grapes. So you see a lot of Cinsault, you see a lot of you see Merlot, Grenache, Syrah, all these kind of things that you see from southern France. Eddie, in this case, also Eddie is a UC Davis graduate as well, so there's some California connection there as well from the winemaking school. But Eddie decided to work with Merlot. These grapes are from vines that are about 100+ years old. I'm sure there's some replanting and average that out there a little bit. The vineyards are all high elevation, so 1,800 meters and up. I believe it goes up even to maybe 2,000 to 2,200 meters. It snows up there, so if you look on their social media, you'll see pictures in the winter, and it is snowy. You don't see that very often. You don't think about that with Lebanon. So high elevation and yeah, exactly. There's ski resorts there, exactly. And so yeah, this is a wine that I think is really, it's unique because it's kind of representing the new, I always say like old school, new school, the new generation, if you will, of Lebanese winemaking. It's the name Phoenix Rising is also an homage to Lebanon. Lebanon has obviously been through a lot of turmoil in the 20th century, if not obviously before then, but so 70s, 80s, obviously the Civil War. And so this is kind of an homage to Lebanese resilience, is really kind of what he is going for with this wine, and with there's a white 100% Merlot sister wine to this wine as well. But as far as the style of the wine, yeah, again, going back to the saying, is it a red, is it a rosé? You can kind of pick. I mean, it depends on how you want to just put something into a box. I would probably say it's like either like a dark rosé or a very, very, very light red. And so it has this kind of, again, like very chillable, summer-friendly character. I would definitely drink it with a chill myself. Though if you didn't, it's still going to show really nicely. A lot of that kind of bright cranberry, kind of crushed cherry, red currant sort of stuff. Just a really kind of like lovely, bright, fresh wine that, yeah, when we learned it was available, we were very excited. We've been actually pinging them on Instagram for months and months and months now. And finally they're like, hey, it's here. And so we're very excited to have gotten our hands on some of the wines from Mersel.
Yeah.
What do you guys think, Dana and T?
You wanna,
Yeah.
you want to list through the tasting? You want to taste it?
Yeah, a thing I would add to Ryan's like excellent exposition is that Merlot is mostly used to make arak, actually. And it's usually grown in, and as a result, most of it's grown in lower elevation because you're gonna get higher yields, more flesh. So you know, it makes sense if you're gonna use it to distill the alcohol. But this is really high elevation, and he says like this creates like a fresher, a more it gives the grape it's more distinction than if it's grown at lower elevation.
Just a quick point. Arak is like the Middle Eastern like brandy that has this kind of aniseed sort of flavor. It's super popular all over, you know, the Levant, and you know, it's
Like ouzo.
It's kind of, yeah, exactly, kind of like ouzo, that sort of thing, and yeah, I think that's
Pastis. It's like a pastis. Yeah.
Yeah.
that's a good point.
Mhm.
Yeah, very popular. I remember in Tel Aviv, Jeff, Dana, and I went to a bar that was just all arak and ouzo, I think.
Funny, I don't remember that.
Get hazy, I'm sure.
Can't imagine why.
Yeah, Dan and I spent many years on excavation in the Middle East. You know, I guess doing an informal study of Iraq. So
Actually, Jeff, this is one you'll appreciate. So, Ryan, you were talking about those early winemaking efforts in what after the breakup of the Ottoman Empire and colonialism, with the French kind of moving into Lebanon and the British moving into Palestine and Egypt. There were a lot of efforts, right, at making wine and realizing the potential, right, for this region to make fantastic wines in Lebanon and the Carmel Mountains. And so there were a bunch of different factors that came into play: geography, right, being able to like ship the wines out at deep water ports and things like that out of Haifa and other places up in and one of the issues was so the sand, right, that's like on the beaches, that was something that was cited as like a great thing, like, oh, there's all this sand, we're going to make bottles out of the sand. And the place where Jeff and I actually started cut our teeth as graduate students is a place called Nachsholim in Israel, Palestine. It's right on the coast. And there's a giant, our dig house was a giant glass factory that was built by the Rothschild family to make bottles for wine. And it has a pretty funny story, funny history, because they went to this great expense to build this massive glass bottle manufacturing facility to make all this wine and ship it out. And the issue is it's Nilotic sand that gets pushed from the Nile up the coast. And Egypt is actually famous for very pure sand. It didn't have the right composition for making good bottles. So they discovered this after like building this factory, and they operated for 2 years before they went totally bankrupt. And they were actually importing sand from France to try to make bottles in the factory, and the whole thing just went under. So it's just kind of a funny anecdote, and also tied to you remember Glass House, Jeff? We drank Arak in the Glass House. So there you go. No.
Yeah. So this wine, I think 1 week Sangiovese is on the skins before being blended with Merlot. Stainless steel tanks, cold ferment for the Merlot. I get, you know, it's just because of how fruity it is. I get like watermelon, some like you know, bright farmers market like strawberries to it. You know, a little grapefruit. I think it's just like a really nice classic summer rosé / you know, dark rosé.
You get a little residual sugar.
Yeah, a little bit too. Yeah.
Definitely summer.
Yeah. And honestly, I think Mersel and Eddie Shami is making some of the most exciting wines in Lebanon right now. You know, I mean, obviously Chateau Moussard is probably the most famous Lebanese winery, but really exciting stuff. He's making skin contact Noir, which Ryan and I tasted, but they were sold out of it. So
yeah, one of the things that I wouldn't say is like I don't know, it's not a problem, but like she's saying, this is an exciting wine because we've tasted a lot of those wines from these kind of French expat winemakers, and they can be very beautiful, very, very good wines. But honestly, to my palate, a lot of those wines end up tasting like wines from southern France. When you're like close to the same sort of latitude, same sun exposures, obviously the soils are quite different. But when you start, you bring in this exact same kind of winemaking, it's, you start making wines that kind of, they don't lose a sense of place by any means. They definitely are unique, but I just, I think that Eddie's, interest in bringing back some of these, quote unquote native varieties, whether or not they're actually, autochthonous to Lebanon is kind of remains to be seen. But the fact that he's trying to make something different, I think is really, really admirable. One of the other grapes that he works with is a grape called Obeida, which I believe also was used for for arak production or for table grapes or for grape leaves, which that's another thing that you see a lot in Turkey is there's these massive vineyards that were used just for like making dolmas for getting the grape leaves, and then the grapes then were just either distilled or they're turned into kind of raisins. Yeah, so a bright future, I think, for Lebanon. And I mean, with the popularity of these Mersel wines, and he's only been doing this for, I think, 5, 6, 7 years, maybe something like that. I think there's a bright future ahead for these wines. And yeah, it's pretty exciting.
And very in keeping with also the history too. Even going back, those of you who've been with us since the beginning will remember our club, which really focused on Ugarit and the types of wines that were coming out of Ugarit at that time as a sort of like entrepot in the Eastern Mediterranean. This is around 1600 BC in the late Bronze Age, and specialty wines being made there. Kepsalem wines, which we actually have the pricing for through Ugaritic tablets that were found in the palace and in the trade depots. The city was essentially razed and burned to the ground, but they're actually making these wines for foreign markets and shipping them over to basically the Mycenaean palace, complex, and selling them there. So this goes way back. This idea of using foreign varietals or taking cues right from the international stage, because this is the beating heart of the Eastern Mediterranean. So
yeah,
like
and
you
we also had Levantine winemakers working in Egypt, right, Dan? I mean, they were exporting their winemakers as well as their wines.
Oh, totally. Yeah, they show up in those. You're like, yeah, in these Egyptian wine labels from from the New Kingdom, 18th dynasty stuff, where it's like it's a Canaanite name. It's like Heti. You're like, that dude's not Egyptian. that dude is Canaanite, and it'd be like if we kidnapped a whole bunch of French dimakers and brought them over here to make wine for us. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
Also, just you reminded me, Dana, that this is also the heart of kind of Phoenicia, and there was like a lot of this essentially grapevine evangelism that the Phoenicians did where they were trading all over the Mediterranean. They brought vines with them, and so there's we really do have I wouldn't say exclusively, but there is a lot to thank essentially the Lebanese wine history, the Phoenicians, for wine being essentially ubiquitous all over the Mediterranean for some of our favorite wine regions: France, Italy, Spain.
I think that's more important than the alphabet. I'm gonna throw that out there. I think so.
Debatable.
Yeah, well, what was our third? Was our third wine club, or second or third or fourth wine club was Wines of the Phoenicians? So I mean, we took that on pretty early. I can't remember which number that was, but
yeah, it was the third or fourth. It was called Study in Purple.
Study in Purple.
Yeah, Study in Purple, the wines.
Revisit some of these. We'll get into some new folks who haven't maybe seen.
Yeah,
we'll
there's definitely more to be said. Yeah.
Well, any questions so far on that third wine, or thoughts on? I saw some Coravan action happening wow, we're opening the pet net. Sorry, it's a disaster. it's not cold.
One quick question here with
Yeah.
I know most of the Lebanese wines like Muzar, for example, are Bekaa Valley to the east, but I guess this is not from, and I actually sort of thought, I mean, I don't know much about Lebanese wine, but I sort of thought all the wines were made in Bekaa Valley, but I guess that's not the case, right? This is not from Bekaa Valley.
Yeah, it's not from the Bekaa Valley. I believe. I mean, obviously Lebanon's not too big of a country, but it's inland and higher elevation than the Bekaa Valley. Originally, a lot of the winemaking was done close, as Dana was kind of mentioning, closer towards the shore and closer towards the coast. But over the last century, it's mostly moved inland. So this is, I think, from the Kadi Anubin, which I believe is, if I remember correctly, is a bit north of Bekaa Valley and in higher elevation than the Bekaa Valley as well.
And then my second question, so I understand the French colonial influence and why you see so many French grapes, but in terms of the Sangiovese here, is there any history behind that, or is that just what the winemaker decided to do?
That I'm not entirely sure of. Because I was looking earlier actually at the site. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a ton of info on all of kind of like the background for some of the vineyards. Because I wanted to know kind of like a bit more about these vineyards. You know, because the Merwa is like, if it's 100+ year old, I think it says 150 on the website, which I don't fully believe, because there's not a lot of 150-year-old vines out there. But I think that there's some questions that I'm curious about. Is like, you know, why Sangiovese? Where did it come from? That I'm not entirely sure of. You know, if he chose that grape specifically, or in some cases it may have just been what he had available to him, because he hasn't been there very long. Relatively. So my guess is there's probably some stuff where he's like, okay, I'm going to convert these vineyards and then I'm going to replant some of these other ones. Because I know he's done some replanting as well.
Or I'm doing something that no one else is doing, right? It is kind of like, I mean, it could be kind of a post-colonial move, right? In that regard, right?
Yeah, I'll send him a message on Instagram, and I'll get back to you, Venkat. Because I'm curious too. And I don't see a reason of like why Sangiovese. I haven't been able to come across that yet. So I'll send a message.
And we haven't seen that in anything else that we've covered. The Messiah, any of the other Lebanese wines that we've
Terrouge, yeah, no, it's all.
Sorry.
Yeah. Good question. All right, do you want to do the pet nat? I think we're the only ones actually tasting the pet nat, unfortunately.
Well,
we couldn't send it to Jeff, and
I don't have it either. Yeah. So.
Well, we couldn't even sell it because when we tasted, and then
we had a little bit of it. We only got a little bit of it to send out to folks. So
they just sold out just because, you know, this wine came in, they showed it around the Bay Area, and it got, you know, we were one of the people, but a lot of other places snapped a lot of these wines up. So. But this is a pet nat that he makes, 80 Sangiovese, 20 Merwa. So just switching the percentage around. I don't think we've had that many pet nats in the club before.
We've never included a pet nat as a core club wine, because I think it's a little bit, it's not divisive. That's not the word I'm looking for, but we want to, you know. Yeah. Anyway, but
do you want to explain really quick to you what pet nat is?
Yeah. I was gonna. So, as you know, like probably most famous style of sparkling wine is probably champagne, and that goes through a double fermentation process, in which after initial ferment, they'll disgorge and then add oftentimes a dosage, which is usually just sugar syrup, cork it, and then let a secondary fermentation that usually produces most of the bubbles. Pet nat, you kind of just do one fermentation in the bottle. Sometimes they might disgorge it to get out the lees, but that's it. So as a result, pet nats usually have slightly lower. Oh my God, I'm just losing my words. Less bubbles than champagne. Carbonation. Thank you. Less carbonation than champagne, and they tend to oftentimes be a little bit more fruity and less dry. Not all the time, but often. It depends on the dosage, what people add to champagne. And they're just kind of a little bit more considered, a little bit more fun. You know, less just like this field blend, just a little bit less serious, but not any less tasty, but just a little bit more like, and oftentimes a little bit more natural too. Oh, by the way, all the grapes, it's organic, and he's using biodynamic principles as well.
Yeah, this again, if you want to talk about like exciting wines from Lebanon, I'm pretty sure this is like the first and only Petit Naturel made in Lebanon. Another one of the ways that Eddie kind of wants to, I wouldn't say give the finger to the establishment, but there's definitely like a bit of rebelliousness there. Petit Naturel is a style that I would say has in the wine world sort of there's a bit of politicking about it, where the more, as T was mentioning, more serious, quote unquote serious, I should say, a generation of winemakers have looked down on it because as being essentially unfinished wine, whereas you have just one primary fermentation in bottle, even though it is also known as like méthode ancestrale, so like an ancient method. It's a lot simpler to make in some ways than making champagne. Though actually I know a few champagne producers who are now making Pet Nat because it's so cool and trendy, and it's very fun, fun to drink and easier to make, easier to turn around. You don't need to age it for 3 or 4 years in a barrel before bottling it. But yeah, I mean, it's something that is very easygoing, quaffable, and like a really nice kind of you can get a lot of expression of the grape in it. But I would say in the last 10 years, Pet Nat's kind of come onto the scene in terms of being known by the quote unquote mainstream. And they can be really wonderful wines. There's definitely some Pet Nats I would say are a little, just a little raw and maybe a little bit, underdone, if you will. And I would say this is not one of those. This one is really, really nicely made, very precise. Just has a really nice bead to it, really, really clean and fresh. Yeah, so it's a style that I think it's a crown cap. So just pop and go. Also, one of the reasons that Pet Nat, sometimes actually, just speaking as someone who has shipped a lot of wine in his life, it sometimes can give you a little bit of pause about shipping it because one, it's a crown cap, so it's a little bit less stable in terms of jostling around in a bottle. And a lot of times when I was talking about Pet Nats that are a little bit more raw, sometimes there's like unfinished fermentation, and you start sloshing around, and it's in the back of a UPS truck or a FedEx truck, they can explode. And so that's something that you definitely want to drink it chilled. And I'm not saying every Pet Nat is like this, but I've definitely had instances where we ship somebody a case of Pet Nat, and I'm like, hey, it's warm where you're at. Are you sure? Yeah, it's fine. And then I get a call. I'm like, are you sure? I get a call 10 days later, or 8 days later, or whatever it ends up being. Say, hey, yeah, so they all blew up. I got and
you run, right? I mean, everybody just saw that. Like,
oh yeah. Yeah, you guys just got back from the survey, so you didn't have a chance to chill it. So yeah, I mean, it'll bubble up. They're very living wines. That's what's kind of fun about them. They're very, very alive, and they're lively, and they're unique. So it's exciting that Eddie's making these wines in Lebanon. And I actually just looked really quick, and the Sangiovese vines are 6 years old, so I'm pretty sure he planted all of those as well.
Yeah, we had a Pet Nat explode all over the kitchen at Arch Street one time. We brought one back from the shop.
Oh my God!
Yeah, just opened it and then it blew up. I mean, just like a volcano of wine all over the. Yeah.
We didn't try to saber that one, did we? Was that one of the failed?
No, it was just popping the crown cap off, and it just blew up all over the place. Yeah.
Right.
Can't saber the crown cap.
Yeah.
I do not recommend that. Professional
you
advice.
say that until you've tried it, right? But you're right, you can't.
I would highly advise against it. Yeah.
I just wanted to make a comment about that, going back to that why Sangiovese question.
Yeah.
I just looked up Eddie, the winemaker, in their website, and he's Australian born and UC Davis trained, and he's making wine in Lebanon. He's not trying to make traditional Lebanese wines, and I think the Sangiovese represents sort of like a break from tradition, maybe a little bit of globalization within Lebanon.
I think that's a really good point. And I think the fact that again, right, instead of working with those French varietals and trying to do something different, and I think you're spot on with that. And again, taking that kind of colonial history, understanding the context of it, doing something different is rebellious, right? Doing something different is, and that is the spirit of Lebanon. That's the spirit of this resurgence. That's why he's got a phoenix plastered on his bottle, right? So I think you're absolutely right about that. Yeah.
And
Okay,
I would say this patinette, like the bead, is really nice. It's a nice like mouthfeel mousse, and it's very clean. It kind of gives me like very similar vibes to the previous field blend.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of similar, slightly more red fruited, but similar flavor profile. Not too different of a flavor.
It is, and I'm revisiting the Miroir right now just to kind of like compare the two, because also visually it's hard to look at the two of them because they're very similar, and not draw some comparisons.
Ryan, there's a good, I know you were in touch, but I think there's a pretty good chance we're going to be able to get some of this in a couple of months, get some more. Yep. So those of you who were kind of left out in the cold with the special offer, we really, I think we were only able to get 6 bottles of it, and so it just sold out really fast. But those of you who missed out on that, or haven't watched the presentation, want to get in on it, just let us know, because I think I don't know if we have an exact date, but I think maybe like October, November. And we actually do have another, we won't spoil it, but we do have another Near Eastern themed club coming up in November as well. So we may have some more exciting Lebanese wines for you at that point too. So
absolutely. Yeah, I think a new container is coming in the fall pretty much. Usually they're pretty regular to come in before the holidays, but if you're interested in the wine, like Jeff's saying, just shoot us an email, send us a note. And we'll put it in the system, and we'll make sure that when it comes in, we can get it for you. There's a comment in the chat, just going back from Elizabeth, saying, "I love Dana's story about the glass house. I'd love to see a future club diving deep into specific soils the grapes are grown in, and see what pottery or glassware is also used, made of the same materials. Not sure what time period could work along with a specific location, but I still think it might be a fun topic." Great story, Dana. I think it's a really, really cool idea. We've definitely talked in the past about basing some of these clubs around like material history of like different regions, and how these different soils, that the wines obviously are grown in different types of soils, but there's so much cool stuff that I'm sure you guys have dealt with excavating in there, like different types of clays, different, like you said, different types of sands, different types of different types of stone. And we've done minerals and monuments, which is a really great club that focused on the materials that we've made, the materials that were made making Egyptian monuments, and then pairing that with wines that are grown in those soils. So we have things like granite and limestone and that sort of thing. But I think we always talk about that club as being so cool, and we're loving that kind of material meets kind of the immaterial sort of culture and of things like winemaking. So it's definitely something that's on our radar for future clubs as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Elizabeth, thanks for that. It's a really interesting question, because when we talk about pottery and the use that pottery was put to in antiquity, there's a lot, when you're looking at thin-walled vessels that are meant to communicate heat, right, in a cooking vessel, versus thin-walled, like highly levigated clay vessels that are intended to actually have breathing properties, right, and that would actually cool water, right? So if you drink water out of like a levigated zir, it's cold. It's actually like an air conditioning system. It's kind of amazingly cold even in hot environments. So all of that really goes into this lived experience, right? Which is what we're kind of trying to get at, right? In the context of like these varietals, these stories, the narrative is kind of paramount, but like also, the physical attributes, right? What does it mean when you're drinking wine out of a wine bowl that you're holding here? We have some wonderful, wonderful vessels from like the tomb of Queen Puabi, where you can actually like reconstruct where, how the wine was being poured and how it was being filtered. So this is all great material to be getting into, and we'll continue to do so. And thanks for the great comment.
And we talked about drinking wines out of bowls, out of a symposium.
Oh yeah.
And Georgian clay quevery.
Yep.
But we've never
Georgian horns, right?
Yeah, horns.
We all did that.
Yeah. So.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, but just putting it off. We haven't like done one specifically. We mentioned here and there. I'm like,
What
it
was
must-
the Riddell glass of antiquity? That's I think what the question really kind of comes down to is
Well, the
like,
funny thing with that glass museum, actually, there's a museum there, which is a fantastic little museum, and
wonderful.
you can actually see things in there that Dan and I personally excavated are on display now. So it's kind of cool. We went back there, it was about 3 years ago with a nonprofit project. T, you were there when we went on
I
that
was
tour.
there, yeah.
Yeah, we all went there, yeah.
Pretty fun, but yeah, it was kind of neat. They really have done a great job with that glass house. So
Mhm.
so some of our finds are on display there.
It's a funny connection in history. We were always kind of driven to this point through I mean, it started with arak, but it did end up with wine, and
Yeah.
it was all meant to be the Arabic term, and to we're talking about Lebanon, so is maktub, which it's written, and it really kind of plays out
Mhm.
on a regular basis with this group that you see out here. So yeah. Anyway. Any
I
other?
had one quick question going back to the second wine and sort of Turkish wines in general. I could be wrong about this, but I did sort of read that Erdogan was trying to dissuade wine consumption and wine production.
That's correct.
And I know you guys are the ancient wine guys, but if you do have any insight on sort of or information about the modern sort of wine situation in Turkey, I'm just curious.
It's
Yeah.
actually he has first of all, he's made it very difficult to open up a new winery legally, and two, wine is so heavily taxed now that Turkish wines are actually cheaper in the U.S. than in Turkey, despite being imported across
Right.
the ocean. So
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of politics at work there. I mean, there's, as we kind of mentioned, as I think Jeff was mentioning, there was like large monopolies that controlled a lot of the wineries for a long time, where millions and millions of gallons of essentially wine was made and then distilled or grown for other purposes. Turkey's always grown a lot of grapes, but just not that much for winemaking. And so there's kind of one of the things that Ataturk actually kind of promoted was this kind of, if you will, kind of cosmopolitan sort of connection to Europe via winemaking. So winemaking actually had this kind of renaissance in the 1920s and in early 20th century. And unfortunately, yeah, we're seeing with Erdogan, kind of there's this obviously this populist sort of element moving towards like restrictive laws about things that are prohibited, for Muslims to drink wine and things like that. That essentially he's trying to control. I mean, he's making definitely moves towards making it more difficult. He's not going to outright ban it because that would obviously draw too much attention. But there's definitely largely politically motivated kind of populist actions that I would say he's taking to discourage it, which is unfortunate. And it's actually for us it's really tough because there's so much history that's taking place in Turkey, and obviously there's so much potential for such amazing wines there, but our options are limited. There's not that many importers of Turkish wine here in the States. Like it's probably one of our hardest countries to find new wineries and new generations of winemakers, bringing in cool projects and cool wines. Just like as T was saying, it's just hard to start a winery there. You basically can't get the permits. You have to, I know there's a lot of kind of corruption. You have to bribe people. They won't let you plant, certain varieties in certain places and all this kind of stuff. And so it's kind of in stasis, if you will. And a lot of the wineries are owned by huge, like kind of like multinational companies. I know that one of the big wineries was owned in the past by what is it? British, what's the company? BAT, British Tobacco. It's a huge tobacco conglomerate that basically owned a lot of the vineyards in Turkey as well. And so I think they've tried to keep it very much in the hands of like large, wealthy monopolies, because likely that's easier to control, easier to negotiate. There's probably some corruption elements there, and it's definitely not a place where you're seeing a lot of these cool kind of small micro wineries come onto the scene here, which is a shame. I really there's so much cool again history, but just there's so many unique terroirs there. There's so many places that could be making wine, and this wine that we had, the Kayra, is from southeastern Anatolia in the southeastern part of the country, obviously. we've had wines from the far west coast, basically just in ancient Troy. We've had wines from near Izmir. There's so many corners of that country that could be making wine, and it's one of the birthplaces of wine. In northeastern Turkey, it's you have basically where you have close to these original sites where people like Dana would go find the original first remnants of winemaking, and we have these histories that are unfortunately being, I would say, at least silenced for now.
Yeah, well said. It's interesting because the Hittites, I mean, there's wine recording, but it's not it's a lot of beer in like Hatti. But it's such a massive place, and it's Anatolia is so varied, and it's I don't know, we always talk about the places that we like to go and the places that we're planning on going, and we have a hit list. I mean, Greece is really high up there. I mean, of course, COVID has really limited our ability to travel. We're pretty much doing this on a summer by summer basis up until COVID hit. But keep your eyes peeled. We are looking at Georgia, Greece. I think doing a blue cruise through Anatolia and visiting some of these regions, getting out to the southeast, looking at what's going on. That's really going to be, I think, the way to get access to these areas while certain forces are in play, like Erdogan and are putting in place. But we're seeing, right, like there are people who are pushing back against that. And I think the future is ultimately bright.
Wait, any other questions in the chat, or anyone want to weigh in? I can't see the chat on my end.
We're all good there.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Well, yeah. I think unless there's any other questions.
So great spending an evening with all of you guys, and connect.
Yeah, can't wait to see you in 2 months. So we'll throw this back. We'll throw this on YouTube as well. Yeah, so if you want to watch it again later, if you didn't want to open all the wines tonight, or didn't have all the wines and one of yours got broken shipping.
Anyway, I was like climate change and supply chain issues, right? Like, we are not. What's happening in the world.
FedEx, yeah.
And I want to say like what Ryan was saying earlier about like just jumping in and asking questions and being part of this conversation. That's what this is about. And if you guys have ideas, like Elizabeth, I love like your comment again, like throw stuff out to us. Be like, oh my God, like I want to see more stuff on like wines of the Crusades, or if there's a topic, because we have a list, honestly, like we have a running list because we come up with stuff and we have a shared document, we add stuff all the time, and we'll forward that thing, we'll bump it up. So just be in conversation with us. We love it. That's why we do it. So
yeah, or even if you just need like a wine recommendation for like a Tuesday night, just shoot us a message on social media or something like that. We'll respond. We'll be happy to. You can use this as a resource, just your pocket sommeliers, if you will.
Yeah, we're around.
Yeah, if you're not on, I don't know if all of you are on Instagram or Facebook, but we have a page for both. Probably a little bit more active on Instagram than Facebook these days. But go ahead and find us there, Ancient Wine Guys, and then of course our website and email that info at Ancient Wine Guys. It's always a good spot to. At least one of us is seeing that pretty much every day. So
great. Well, say thank you to everybody who joined us tonight. Thanks, Sam, Darby, Venkat, Eloise, Elizabeth. As always, it's great to see all of you. It's a pleasure to share these great wines and to share these stories. And we'll look forward to next time. And
glad of every
enjoy the wine.
All right, guys. Go easy. Take care, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Right.
Good night.
Thanks so much.
Night, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Great session.
Thanks, Venkat.